Hello, my name is Alma Robinson, and I am the Executive Director of California Lawyers for the Arts. CLA is a statewide nonprofit organization that was founded in 1974 to serve artists and arts organizations of all disciplines with advocacy as well as services that provide support with legal and business issues. With staffed offices in San Francisco, Berkeley, Sacramento, Los Angeles, and San Diego, we provide several core services. First, we provide legal counseling to specialized attorneys who provide assistance with a variety of intellectual property questions, as well as contract reviews and negotiations and other important business issues. Depending on the client's financial status, legal assistance may be available on a pro bono or reduced fee basis. We also provide a specialized program that assists independent inventors and small startups with their patent applications. To help with situations involving disputes, we provide a range of alternative services, including negotiations counseling, mediation, and arbitration that can avoid the expense and hassle of going to court. Finally, we offer a full menu of educational programs that include workshops, symposia, and conferences on various legal topics for artists and arts organizations. Many of these programs are posted on our YouTube channel, and we encourage you to use these tools to educate yourself on the legal issues before you reach out for specialized assistance from our organization. Thank you for joining today's program. And please consider joining CLA on our website at www.calawyersforthearts.org so that we can continue to maintain our full range of services. Thank you.
So who am I? I have a professional pathway through theater. I'm a theater artist and manager. I have about 30 plus probably more years being a stage manager, a production manager, a general manager, and a managing director. In that pathway, I also did a lot of work in audience and audience development, particularly as sort of marketing into managing in that sense. Obviously, I'm a teacher. I'm working at Carnegie Mellon. I used to work at American University, and I'm also a writer. My passions in this area are really systems theory, which is how we change things. So if I change something on one over here, it's going to really affect things over here, and really understanding how businesses work as systems. Obviously, I love audiences. I obviously love technology. That's why I run the Arts Management and Technology Lab. And on the few moments when I'm not working, I am busy hiking, biking, or as you can see in the picture, hanging out with dogs that I own and or foster. So I do a lot of volunteer work and animal and environment work. So that's sort of who I am. So we're going to start with our definitions and frameworks. So for me, when I talk about arts marketing, communication, as I said, we're talking audiences, donors, it's really all about communication. It's really two aspects of it. It's niche marketing and relationship marketing. And you put them together. And why I say it's niche is that on the whole, when we're working in a nonprofit space, we're not releasing the Black Panther or a major movie release, right? We're working in a local community or in a regional community, and a lot of our work is in person. In COVID, it's moved online, but our missions are typically directed more toward a smaller number of people. And I also then would add to that, it's relationship marketing, because we're not doing that one transaction, and we're not saying come see this particular product multiple times. What we want is to have this long relationship with someone. We want them to come once and then maybe come again, and then maybe be a member or engage in a different way with our institution, maybe take classes and actually engage in some of our other programs. Be a donor, right? This is part of their life, and it isn't linear, but it is a relationship. And much like a relationship, it's our relationships with our stakeholders and audiences is sometimes messy. But I think you want to be clear on what that relationship is, and which is why I like the two pictures. Do you want to have the picture on the top, or do you want your relationship with your audiences and your donors to look like the picture on the bottom, right? One of the pieces to also think about is how fast do you move through your relationship? So those of you who are in this work, having hands-on work, you want to be careful not to rush to marriage or jump in bed really quickly. So if somebody's the first person that they've signed up for a newsletter, they've walked in and had one experience with your organization, the thing you actually don't want to do is follow up immediately with something that says, hey, do you want to donate? Because in some ways it's like, hey, we went on a date, we had coffee. I mean, you're asking me for money now, right? So there was a study done at Lyric Opera where they actually, dug through all their tessitura data. And they discovered that if they didn't ask for money and they just sort of said, hey, here's who we are, why don't you come back and see another show and engage with us in this other way? They did that for 3 or 4 times before they asked for money. They were much more likely to get money. In addition to that, if they went from single contact, give us money, they tended to never get a second contact point. So the journey just ended. So you have to really be conscientious of it. And we have the tools to do that. In fact, what I would recommend is really actually having tracked relationships. And you can say, all right, I'm going to have like 4 buckets of people. I'm going to have the first people, the people are here for the first time. I'm going to have my long-term people. I'm going to have sort of these interim people, and they're each going to get slightly different messages, because we don't want to send the same email to someone who's been to us once as the same person who's been here and has been giving us $10,000 a year, right? So you want to take a little bit of time and customize some of that messaging. Let's think about this another way. These are our relationship pathways. We have to get the world aware of us. We have to become relevant enough to them that they're going to want to be what we would call acquisition in marketing language, but engage with us. And then we want them to come back. And I think the awareness is one of the biggest pieces that we have as an issue, sort of that awareness into acquisition when we're dealing with diversity. This is where we tend to fail when we're trying to gain audiences who are not normally in our rooms, right? Is that we either assume they're aware, and so we're just like, why don't you come? Or we don't make our work relevant for the acquisition piece. And we'll be looking at this as we're going through further. So this is the old-fashioned marketing funnel, right? Most of you have seen this if you are in the marketing space. If you're not, the nice acronym for this is AIDA. So anybody who has heard of either Elton John's piece or the opera, AIDA is a lovely way to remember it. But you're trying to essentially get people's attention in a world where they're getting 5,000 or 6,000 messages a day, right? So if we're doing awareness, this is really hard. And once we get attention, then we're trying to get them to be interested in us in a way that is interesting in their language. We often use too much jargon. And then you want to build the desire so they'll take action and engage, and actually maybe engage with you in whatever program you're sending them. I talk about the attention aspect being hailing, like you're hailing a cab. Like, hey, I'm over, or you're waving at a friend across the road. That's what you're trying to do, whether it's print piece, whether it's an advertisement that you've put in Facebook. You want it to work like the picture you have here. Something that's going to be attractive or unusual in such a way that it attracts their attention so that they have to look harder, right? So what's interesting here is that something's wrong in the picture. And even subconsciously, our brain will look at this because there's something wrong with it. And we'll be like, wait a minute. And it sort of pulls us in. And then we're like, what's wrong with it? First thing, why is there a lollipop on the ground? Then why are there ants there? And why are they not eating it? So then you actually have to pay attention. We don't pay attention to most of our messages. So how are you doing that in the various places that you're messaging with your stakeholders? Here's another way of looking at this, which I would also say has a version of the customer journey map we'll be looking at, which is understanding that you're going from exposure to discovery, consideration, and conversion through this cultivation of a relationship, which I like that they talk about happiness. We're going to hear about fun and happiness in a minute. And then thinking about that retention. How do you keep them coming back? Right. And I use the term from the sports side is sort of like, how do we make them fans? Right. Why do we think that you can't have a fan for your organization? And I will say, as we're looking at the end, we'll get to the end of this, we often market our programs and not our brand. So it's not, they're often, wow, I saw this wonderful exhibit, or I had this great experience here, but they're not really connecting that what I am is a fan of this great nonprofit that does this excellent work. Okay, so that's some of the communication that also has to be embedded in here. And we'll talk about this more and how to use your data to be effective with a essentially zero budget going through this funnel. I think we're getting near the last part of definitions. In the world of acquisition, we often use two words. We're either broadening our audience or we're diversifying our audience. And then there's this other word called deepening, which is part of an activity, but it's really tied to the retention side. So when I'm broadening my audience, what you're literally saying, I'm taking my statistics and I'm getting a whole bunch more people like the people that are already in my room. And if I'm diversifying, I'm getting people who are not in my room, right? Which is why I would say if you're Crossroads Theater and you're in Philadelphia and you are a historic theater that's serving by, about, and near Black authors and artists and audiences, then if you were truly diversifying, you might be reaching out to a Hispanic market or a Latino market or et cetera. If you're deepening, that's when you're really connecting audiences to strategies and programs that meet different typologies for greater artistic impact and or donations, right? Because ultimately donors develop from our impact and transformational work. And they don't tend to happen in the first contact, they happen over time as we're deepening our relationships with them. But it is important to sort of understand intentionally, am I broadening my audience? Am I diversifying my audience? So who are our audiences? This is key. You're going to have a lot of resources for this data now. In 2017, the National Endowment for the Arts did a survey for public participation. They do this every, what was 10 years, now it's like every 5. You'll notice that if you are working in the world of live plays or musicals, only 24% of Americans seem to go to those. And if you are at an art gallery or museum, only 23% go there. However, if you're interested in engaging more in fairs and festivals and crafts, something that's more outdoor, live music, you're going to get a greater part of our populace in the country. There's another group that does research called Culture Track, and they actually interview people and survey people who are actual ticket buyers. Not every American, like as a sample set, but ticket buyers. What's interesting, and this is where we're going back to the happiness factor, the top reason, regardless of age, that someone wants to engage is to have fun. The top barrier is it's not for someone like me, right? So when we're doing some of our communication and our cultivation, that's where we have to think about, how am I getting people in my room that aren't usually there? If the top barrier is it's not for someone like me, how can I understand who you are so I can help you maybe understand that this might be for you? Another thing that's important to notice is what we as insiders think of as art and culture, our audiences do not. So notice that community festivals and street fairs are identified as, not only identified as culture, but something they go to a lot. The people who are buying tickets to events. Public and street art, 54% identify that as art and culture. Food and drink experience, right? So those are identified as art and culture ahead of plays, classical music, opera, and ballet. Just an interesting piece of information when you're thinking, how am I communicating to people? So Culture Track did a wonderful study in 2020, actually. It's a COVID study, post-COVID study. But they asked the people, 125,000 of them, what did you do in 2019? And I know that this is a very small slide and I'm not expecting you to read all of it, but it's important to note that, 57% of those surveyed went to a movie or film, 61% went to a public park, and then you're way down to like 6% for world music, 9% for jazz music. Right? It's well below, even the people who are buying tickets, it's a niche market, right? And that's what they did in 2019, that day that feels like eons ago. So what does that mean now? Well, the good thing is when the study that they did specifically around COVID is that our use has gone up digitally, duh. However, people that don't usually go to the arts are really interested in trying it out online. So like literally in cultural centers, 74% were not visitors the time when they had never been to a cultural center, prior to 2020 when they went digitally. Classical music, 36% of the people consuming classical concerts had never gone to an orchestra live concert. So this is a massive opportunity, right? And it's something we'll be talking about, but something to think about. What are these relationships? And are you actually able to cultivate them the way that you would like to intentionally do this, right? So you can also get data around your discipline and industry with specific pieces. I follow TCG a lot with Theater Communications Group that really dives into the data about theater audiences or American orchestra audiences or museum audiences. I also use a lot of data and look to it that's local around Pittsburgh, or when I used to live in Washington, D.C., around the D.C. area, because it really helped me understand how each local community is so different than others. And I've lived in many of them, and they're all very different. New York City, Washington, D.C., Pittsburgh, none of them are the same. In terms of donations, I also wanted to point out this data aspect, because it's important as we're thinking about our relationships. So there's a study done every year called Giving USA. And one of the things they've found in the last 3 years is that the mega donors are hiding a decrease or a loss of younger money. So the smaller donations are actually on a down. Households on the whole, there are fewer households giving and fewer small donations being given. However, there are, of course, these massive donations that are coming in from individuals. So it looks like individual donations are growing. And that's an important thing to recognize, because in the long tail, I call it the long tail. If this keeps going, we're not going to have anybody to fill in with those older, larger donors, because they won't have a habit of giving to the arts and to giving in general prior to that. So it's something to think about, as many of our consultants tell us, oh, here, do this formula and hit this mega wealthy donor. We're ignoring a lot of people in our communication and relationship development that we need to be cultivating now. So some solutions: think like a marketer, but think like a not-for-profit marketer. So I love Big Duck and I love brand raising. It's something that I follow personally and when I practiced as a marketer. And that's really thinking from the organization at the top and first. What is my mission, my vision, my values? Who really are the people I want to serve? What are the objectives of these programs I'm trying to do? And then really honestly knowing who I am as the position I am in the marketplace and the personality that I have. And one of the pieces I'll give it as an example is I had in the theater I worked in, they were convinced we had a national perspective. I was like, no, we are #1 regionally and we are the state theater, but nobody cares about us like 4 states over. But the executive director and the board were convinced that our position was national. And I was like, our position isn't national. So you have to own it. And then that identity really has to reflect it, both your visual and your message. Because once you really have a good identity platform, you can start giving an experience online and in person to create an awareness that is true to yourself, which is part of what happens with that relationship, right? You really have to start at the beginning. So once you have you're starting to think like a marketer, you want to think about it as an experience design, and not an experience design in the short term, like I'm thinking about my website or I'm thinking about this particular program, but from the audience perspective. I think this is my theater background. I'm always surprised when I've worked with clients who are museums or sometimes musicians, and they don't know how to do this because they were never taught to do this, versus those of us in theater who are like, think about this, think like this character. So if you think like your audience, or you ask and talk to your audience and learn things about them, or the people who aren't in the room, then you can start working through this arc of engagement. And we're going to talk about that as a journey a little bit later. Key to this for diversifying our audiences in a world where maybe only 2% of the American public goes to things like opera, we need to reframe and become relevant again. So how can you do that? Part of what you want to think about reframing is we have a tendency to have jargon, and we tend to think from our own perspectives. And so finding ways to work with our stakeholders in the ways that they need to understand our art, and not judge and not make assumptions, and just have conversations and show what you think is interesting and cool from all sorts of perspectives, is an important aspect of the work we need to do to become relevant in our communities again. So here's your data. We're going to play with some of these. You can use external data. We're going to look at some. One is Tapestry and Claritas, which can give you a lot of information about the audiences and donors you have or those you don't. There's also, we looked at the NEA, and again, there's local data as well as census tracts. And then internally, you have your CRM data, you have Google Analytics data, you have social analytics, you have a lot of data about the habits of the people who are aware of you or you've already acquired. And then of course you can do research. You can have surveys, you can have focus groups with people who aren't in your rooms. You can have observational data, which is really useful. You can have post-it walls. There are a lot of ways of collecting data that you can use to get a better sense of who's coming in the room, what they want, what their barriers are, and how to get through those pieces. One of the pieces that's often asked is, how do I analyze all this, right? Often we collect data and we don't do anything with it. So unstructured data is what comes out of most surveys. What do you think about this program? How did you like it? And a bunch of words come at us. Wordart.com is a great way to create weighted word clouds. So we just did this with a client here in Pittsburgh to understand what Radiant Hall's actual artists, the people who are in their studios, think about them and what words are associated, right? So wordart.com is something it's a free tool. You can also use dashboards. So even if you don't have like high skills to do a lot of data analysis, for instance, Google Data Studio, which is free if you're a nonprofit with Google, and to be honest, I think you can use it even without that. And you can use spreadsheets of data that come in from surveys. You can use your CRM data. You can actually link directly to your Google Analytics. So there are a lot of things that you can do to help understand what does this mean. So one of the pieces I recommend many organizations do if they're trying to diversify, I'm like, okay, get all the data in your CRM and see where are the empty spots, right? What are those zip codes that rarely come to your organization that should be, or you assume they are? So like do that kind of analysis. Again, here's Google Data Studio. There are a lot of how-tos. And what's nice is if you'll notice, you can send anything into Google Data Studio. On the bottom left, you see it says file upload. So it doesn't have to be in the Google domain. You can also just move it into a Google Sheet. You can get really fancy if you have someone who's an IT person and upload your SQL or have Cloud SQL information coming in. So it can be very robust or it can be very simple. Now, I wanted to take a second to show you how to understand the people that you're actually working with and or the people that are missing. So this is one of the tools and it's free. It's called Tapestry. It's part of the Esri mapping model. And you can look at zip code lookup is what's up on the upper side. And this is my world. So I literally put in my zip code and there are three areas, three types, right? We tend to act in our psychology more than our demographics. Just because I'm a certain age doesn't make me a certain way. So these are the three sort of psychology affinities that are in this area. Emerald City is one. I'm actually one of the comfortable empty nesters. I'm not a young mobile. I'm definitely well educated, but this gives you a psychology of them. They like to rent low in low density urban neighborhoods throughout the country. They go online for professional networking. They have online dating. They buy natural, organic, or environmentally friendly products. So how do they know that? Because they have a lot of data sources, right? Another tool from Veritas, which was bought by Nielsen, that does some of the same things, but I like it. I personally like it better. It does the same piece. So now they have different words, but the same idea, same zip code. Here it's urban achievers, urban modern mix, cosmopolitans, American dreams, aspiring A-listers. And when you look at that, you can compare, you get a lot more specifics. So the urban achievers segment, if I click on it, I see how many US households are there, what the household income is, what their households look like. So mostly without kids, or are they owning? Are they college graduates? And the best part, where do they shop? So if I'm trying to figure out where to place ads, look, I can find out where these people shop because they're getting this information from credit card data, right? So, flies on JetBlue, goes to Las Vegas, owns a Mercedes, owns a Mazda, shops at New York. You started getting a sense of the personalities of the people. Because once you have this information, you can start doing true analysis of the people who are in your rooms that you want in your rooms or are not in your rooms, right? And I actually recommend taking a minute and doing customer personas. Lucid Chart is a really great tool. You can do these sort of as a plug and play, but you get a sense of it, right? So decision making, what's a barrier, what's a motivation is part of that. Like Alex, this is a North Carolina example that I pulled online. How much money does Alex make? Alex is vegan and she cares about her health and her body, right? So what are these things that she's trying to accomplish in life? Same thing for, they're both Alexes. What are the pieces that are part of these worlds that are coming together for the people that I'm trying to communicate with? There's another version of it. I like this one a little bit better, but it takes a higher skill set, right? Because this has goals, it has your frustrations, too much time, X, Y, or Z. What are motivations? Price, comfort, convenience, speed. This is a particular one that's focused on loyalty. And then what are the corollary brands, right? And so that helps you get a sense of how your position reflects on this particular identity, because then you can do things called journey maps. So this is a journey map, and the journey map is good because it takes a minute for you. You can just write it out in words. This was a very fancy project that we worked on probably 4 years ago for a theater company. And this was saying, all right, let me think about a type of a person. All right, I'm creating a fake person. And this is a repeat single ticket buyer who's age 50 to 69. So looking at my own data, what do I know? Right. And so then what's the story I can think about for this person? And then where are the places, if you see in this, where are the things that are barriers for their engagement? So in square one on the top left, poor season offerings is a barrier, right? As going through the season, another barrier might be nobody to go with or difficulty purchasing tickets. So you can sort of see, okay, what are the barriers I need to deal with? And then what are the goals that this particular persona is looking for? High quality theater experience while spending time with friends outside of work. That's the goal. How can I communicate to that goal? Another one, this is my favorite one that we created. This is the first time single ticket buyer. This would be called an acquisition. 18 to 29-year-old. This is Mike, has a master's degree, has a nice income, is working, is a millennial, single, Pittsburgher, and is attracted because he discovers that there's an event that has stage combat, right? And that's what is the really exciting part. And then how do they then take that person through the process? And because they're a new person, there are a lot more breaking points. So that's where you want to start really playing with this and get into the weeds, because the only way you can create thoughtful communication that isn't what I call just yelling, we have an event, is if you start thinking about, well, who am I talking to? So you create these essentially fake stand-in people that you then sort of try to understand what's stopping them from coming, what's motivating them to come, so you can use the language and those frameworks to communicate more clearly with them. As I said earlier, we tend to focus on our programs and forget about who we are. And there's a 70-30 rule that 30% of what comes out of your communication channels should be mission oriented, brand oriented, not program. So ultimately, you want to think about what are some of the messages you have to communicate your mission and your impact. That's really going to turn on a donor, right? And it's going to reinforce why buy a ticket or an engagement with you instead of one of the other organizations on the marketplace. And then find ways to do that through true stories of impact with true people, right? And one of the measures and dashboards you may want to think about using as part of this communication platform is thinking about, what is my impact? How am I measuring it? How can I prove that I did it? And how can I use that as some of the communication work that I do? Because that's going to really fuel your retention. Most people are finding more intentional living is coming out of COVID. And if I know that my money, when I'm having an enjoyment, but my money is going to something good, I'm more likely to spend my money there, right? And I think a lot of that's something we're seeing in general, even pre-COVID. Questions. What is a good way to get stories or testimonials from our attendees? So a couple of ways would be, you can have a Post-it wall for one. Post-it walls are easy. You're not going to get a full piece, but you can have a prompt and have people fill out Post-its. You can also have one of your staff do quick feedback videos with people in the who are coming through your space, and say, have one question. It's sort of like having a roving reporter asking the same question of everybody in the room. You can also set that up as a kiosk. So it's pretty easy to set up an iPad on a table that has a poster board prompt that says, record your thoughts about X here, and just have it set up so it automatically resets to a camera. So those are some ways to do it, because I think if you send an email, no one's going to answer it.
How can we use the data to track donors or improve fundraising?
There's two impacts to that. So part of the improving fundraising is to really understand the pathways of your donors. So, sometimes we definitely have our goals, but to truly dig into the data to understand what was motivating them to give and what pathway they came in through. And then thinking after that, once you know those pieces and who they are, like do some data analysis from their zip codes, et cetera. When you want to acquire new ones, do you want to broaden or do you want to diversify? Because you can usually only do one at a time. And if you're trying to get more of the same, then you would amplify in the similar patterns that got you what you got. And if you're diversifying, then it may be thinking, again, talking to people that aren't giving, that you don't know why. Like why wouldn't this person give? That's what I would say. If I had a group of people that were in my education programs that were not attending my performance programs. And I literally was like, why aren't they attending? They have all the right parameters. And I did focus groups and discovered they didn't know. They weren't paying attention. They didn't see it. I was like, it's a door. It's like, why don't you look through those double doors? So I think one of the pieces is to then start collecting data about the people who aren't, to figure out what's the barrier.
How can I ask people who don't attend why they don't attend in a way that makes it okay for them to be honest?
So how to make them be honest? That's an excellent question. People tend to be honest when there's nothing that's going to hurt them, right? People will not be honest if they think they're going to be judged, etc. So sometimes you would employ a focus group person that nobody knows, but it's better if it's somebody that they know. So friends of friends who can then talk to someone, right? It is complicated. It's one of the hardest things to do, is to get to know people that you don't know already. For instance, I'm going to talk about Maryland, right? So let's say I'm in my community where I used to work in Maryland. I would literally talk to some strangers in the stores. Literally be like, hey, have you ever, I work at this place. Have you ever heard of it? I am an introvert. It was not easy, but I encouraged people to just talk about where we were as staff, because my staff was 52 and they're everywhere, and find out why people weren't actually attending.